Thank you for joining us for the COVID Chronicles CEO Roundtable. I am Haley Boning, co-founder and CEO of StoryForge.
My name is Julie Bornstein, and I am the founder and CEO of a company called The Yes.
My name is Sharon Leidy. I'm the CEO of The Vitamin Shop.
My name is Aman Advani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a Boston-based clothing brand, Ministry of Supply.
G'day everyone, my name is Rafe Petkovich. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Klarna here in the Americas.
Now, before we begin our active conversation, I'd like to ask each of my panelists to tell us a little bit about the business that they lead. And Julie, why don't we start with you?
We are a brand new company. We launched in May of last year, and the company exists to make shopping easier and more fun. We started in women's fashion, so that's who we are currently serving, as women who are interested in fashion and in brands, from really ages of 20 to 70. The way we work is we really are a technology platform, and we partner with brands. A shopper comes on and fills out a Q&A, and they answer some really sort of critical questions about their style preferences, their size, and their budget. And then they basically have a store that is built around them. We serve you products and suggestions and recommendations that are based on the things that you give us feedback on. Everything in the app, you can yes or no. So as we're called The Yes, and the app continues to adapt to you to get better and smarter over time.
We are a health and wellness lifestyle brand based out of the New York City metro market. We have about 720 stores across the United States. We also have a banner called Super Supplements in the Washington State, Pacific Northwest area as well. We cater to a very large demographic. We have customers from teenage years to grandparents, and our business is primarily vitamin, minerals, and supplements, as well as sports nutrition. And our mission is to help you live your best life, but how you define it, because we all have our own journey. And for some of us, it's our own personal journey. For others, it's about taking care of a parent or a child or a partner. You can always count on us for quality products as you continue on this health and wellness journey.
My name is Aman Advani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a Boston-based clothing brand, Ministry of Supply. We started the company about 8 years ago now. My partner and I were students at MIT. And we were both kind of really obsessed with this idea of how could we use engineering and science to change the clothes we wore, outside of the gym. And so 8 years later, here we are, still very much both involved in running the company and focus on that sole mission. How do we use science to make the most comfortable clothing on and for the planet? We make clothing that largely suits you out of home, right? We do not make a lot of super traditional loungewear. There's no sweatpants, no traditional kind of baggy hoodie. There's nothing like that in our line. It's stuff that's built for out of home. And so, as you might imagine, the pandemic was tough with offices and retail all shutting down. We also own and operate 6 US stores, or we did pre-pandemic. So you can imagine that the actual course of the pandemic has hit us hard, but we're as optimistic as ever about the other end of this, where, like I said, our value proposition, everyone learned, on the same day, and it's a pretty unique position to be in coming out of this.
My name is Rafe Petkovich. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Klarna here in the Americas. Klarna is a leading global payments and shopping service provider, and we offer that through a shopping experience. So that's inclusive of payment options for consumers, social shopping features through our Klarna app, and personal finance management services as well that provide inspiration, convenience, and value to both consumers and to the retailers that we serve. And we're live in 19 markets, soon to be 21 markets. The US is not only soon to be our biggest, but also our fastest growing market.
I am Haley Boning, co-founder and CEO of StoryForge. We help founders of businesses, particularly ambitious, purpose-driven founders, to align their teams and get the clarity necessary to get everyone on the same page so they can have the impact that they want. So what do you think, Sharon, in your experience in the past prepared you to lead during the last 10 months?
I've had the good fortune of leading a lot of large organizations in my career. I grew up in operations, so always have been on the front line with consumers and with associates that are dealing with, again, whatever's thrown their way. I mean, because, it's been challenging to be, especially if you run a store, many retailers were closed for a long period of time. We were certainly impacted by that, not as much as others, but still were impacted some, where we had furloughed up to 30% of our workforce during the height of the pandemic in the spring, when retail was really impacted. For me personally, it's really been a year of perspective, really focusing on the things that are most important. And for us, it was making sure that we truly understand our customer. And when I talk about the customer, I talk about the internal customer, which is our health enthusiasts, and the external customer, which is people like, you and I that come and shop in a store or on a website, and, really understanding who the customer is and what's on their minds, and having the agility to be able to change literally on a dime, I think has been incredibly important.
As you can tell from my accent, global diversity as well. I'm an Aussie by accent, Croatian by heritage. I've worked in numerous markets globally, and that's afforded me the value of being able to understand what consumers are looking for from a variety of different perspectives. And so, that's certainly taught me over the last 10 months that retailers who prepare for the unexpected are best positioned to capitalize on it. And also the technology, similar to Aman, I was a applied science graduate growing up, but technology and science continues to be an enabler for change and to help companies thrive through these difficult times. And so, for me, it's a privilege to lead companies during these different difficult times.
Yeah, these are the times that demand leadership rather than management. So for those of us that study leadership and study those who lead, it's the most exciting time to be alive when we're thrown these kind of challenges. So thank you.
I think in some ways we got a little bit lucky. And that's despite, the business generally getting hit pretty hard by the pandemic. Even then, I'd consider us a little bit lucky in that a few years ago, somebody introduced us to an article that was an adaptation of the old hierarchy of needs that everyone's certainly familiar with from school growing up. And it was translating that hierarchy of needs. There's an HBR article that's probably easily Googleable that translated the hierarchy of needs to consumer hierarchy of needs, and kind of this idea of the kind of bottom base of just transactional commerce all the way up to the top. And one of the premises that they kind of constantly introduce throughout that article is this idea of timeless truths and things that can kind of pervade, over decades, generation, consumer bases, anything like that. And so a few years ago, I think in a retrospectively in perfect timing, really shifted our product focus away, or our brand's focus away from product and towards the timeless truth of science and comfort. Two things that we stood behind since day one that we let kind of really shine in our tagline. Our tagline is scientifically better. And it has been now for many, many years. And so I think in that way, in positioning our brand, well prior to the pandemic around this timeless truth that happened to be more relevant this year than ever before, with science becoming a bit of a divisive issue, we yelled even louder, our belief and support of the impact that science can have. And so in that way, I think, I don't know that it directly answers the question of me as a leader personally, but I'd kind of give that credit to our team for driving a change towards a truth that we would be pursuing as our mission statement that could be pervasive across almost any atmosphere, where it's hard to imagine a world where science and comfort don't matter. And in that way, I think we were fortunate a few years back to have gone ahead and pivoted in that direction. Now, I'll add that product doesn't follow immediately, right? You can change your brand and your mission, and you can realign kind of your tagline, but your product, if you make a physical product, it doesn't change overnight. And so in that way, we've spent the last few years making sure that our product represented a wider array of clothing selection, not just suits and dress shirts. That was a work in progress that would have taken 5 years had the pandemic not accelerated it.
This was a really, really challenging year, I think, for so many leaders, because it was such a challenging year for our teams and our businesses. And I'm curious to know, how did you personally, as a leader, have to pivot this year? What were the things that you needed to change, that you needed to adapt in the way that you led to lead your teams during this challenging year?
Well, I guess as you think about what happened early on when the pandemic hit, and especially retail was hit so incredibly hard by so many shutdowns, and people were, scared to go out, quite frankly, and to kind of carry on with regular life. I think, you have to understand how that's also impacting your team, because your team delivers the results that you need to drive your business. And so I think listening was really important, to listen at a different level. I also found that, safety of our people and our customers became the most important thing. And so we kind of started with safety being the number one thing, that that was our filter for everything that we did. And we started there because if your team and your customer doesn't feel safe, how do you run your business? The other component that was really important was, I think we had to simplify. We had to think about what are the things that are really most important to get us through this period of time, what's important to the customer, and then how do you shape your business to support the customer? I'm a huge customer. I'll talk about the customer all day long, because that's why we do what we do. And again, because of my bias towards, external customer, internal customer, it really became what's important to the customer. And by listening and understanding, having empathy to kind of what's going on out there, really shaped kind of what our plans were and how we went after running the business. There were also, quite frankly, a lot of things that would have bugged me normally that you just kind of had to say, you know what, it just doesn't matter. That's where perspective comes in. And that's where you have to think about what's really important. And I think that when you can understand and you can link it back to the values of your organization, it makes what you do very clear. And I'm truly grateful that, we do have a mission, and that we live and we do everything through it. It's our filter. And it really made kind of what we did in terms of running the business, the decisions that we made, very, very simple. We made some calls early so that our people didn't have to worry about certain things. Like, we made the decision to keep our office closed early. Till June of 2021. In the early days of 2020, when this was happening, because it was one more distraction that our people didn't need to think about. We let decision-making happen at the right levels. It really pushed decision-making down. So it made what we did, very tangible at the local level. And I think, pushing decision-making, trusting your people, because you're doing all of this remotely now, became a big part of how we ran the business. And thank goodness we had a lot of dry runs on the technology side in 2019, because it really helped us then execute and deliver what we needed to do in 2020.
I saw Aman and Julie, I saw you nodding your head there. Julie, how did you adapt your leadership? You had a very different kind of team to run, and a very new team. How did you have to change and pivot?
It was interesting because our team is about 35 people. And so there was some benefit to being smaller because there's more intimacy and you can really connect with everyone. I think that, a couple of thoughts. One is there's just sort of a level of humanity that, I think a natural disaster-like event creates for everybody. And I think that you end up having more conversations about people, their lives, you're in everybody's home, their kids are running through. And so I think that there has been that advantage, is that we've all gotten a little more personal, maybe in some ways. And certainly a lot of people have gone through their own personal forms of tragedies or problems. And so you need to kind of take each person's needs as they come. And we've had to do some adaptive things for different people's work circumstances, which I'm sure everyone's faced. So I think that has, in some ways that creates a little more intimacy among the team. And I would guess it, happens in different parts of different teams in larger companies, but certainly I think in our case, I think that, Sharon made the point about simplifying the business. And I do think that, while I'm not sure we simplified our business, I think being forced to really clarify what it is you're working on and really document everything. I mean, we have taken, I would say we were always a big, Google Docs, everyone gets in there and really writes things down. But more than ever, I think being able to sort of document what you're working on, making it really clear what the priorities are, having clear ways that everybody knows that they've achieved the goals for whatever time frame you set. We do monthly OKRs. Those things have been essential because we're not sort of physically with each other to kind of talk through things as much. And I would say the last part is just probably communicating your thought process as a leader. So I think that, not everyone's going to agree with any decision. So Sharon mentioned, they made the call to not go back to the office until the following year. And my guess is there are people who that bothered because they were like, well, maybe we can go back earlier and I don't like being remote. But I think as long as you share the why and your thought process with it, people come along. We actually did the opposite. I have been so eager to get back and I sort of am like, maybe it'll be done, but certainly early on before we really knew the time frame. And so we said, we're gonna take it kind of month by month. And then there was a point at which we said, okay, clearly we're not going back through the end of the year. But I think as long as you are sharing, the inputs and the factors that you're sort of considering as you make whatever decision it is, it goes a long way to bring people along.
Yeah, Haley, I would wholeheartedly agree with Julie. Communication's been really key, and transparent communication, I think, is so important, especially when you as a leader, you don't have the opportunity to kind of really look at somebody in the eye to kind of get a sense. You miss out on what I like to call the happy accidents, in the cafe or, by the elevator. I ride the bus back and forth to New York City, and there's this kind of group of us that's on the bus all the time, and you get to have a conversation and you get to know what's on their mind. And because I do find this medium very transactional. And so I do think as leaders, understanding kind of organizational effectiveness and how do you communicate? Do they understand why? And making sure at all levels of the organization. So I know we did we call them shop talks, and we do them, it's all company once a month. And it's been a very effective tool in terms of communicating what's going on. At the height of the pandemic, we were communicating weekly about what was going on because we had so many stores closing, and then they were opening, and then they were closing again. And, so there were all kinds of things, but I think it's adaptability. It's like, how do you make sure that you adapt? How do you know your customer and make sure that you can meet them where they are?
Sharon, you're so right. As someone who is the beneficiary of many of those happy accidents that you talked about, I've never been the smartest person in any room that I've walked into. And so being able to benefit from those moments of clarity that come after the meeting or that come from a side conversation or, that's been very much present in my mind as a leader, because this forum doesn't allow for vigorous debate. It doesn't allow for great problem solving, for whiteboarding challenges and the like. And so, recognizing our responsibility to be able to draw that out of our people is critical, and also listen to what's happening at the front lines with our customers. That's certainly something that's been immensely challenging in this environment as well.
So Rafe, how have you, with Klarna being such a global business, so you have employees that you're leading that are in different countries, that are having different experiences with COVID and under different lockdowns. How have you changed the way you've been leading to stay more connected, to lean in the way Julie and Sharon have talked about?
Well, it's very interesting. You should mention this, but our head office is domiciled in Sweden, where they took a very different stance to the management of COVID early on, and were subsequently rewarded and then punished, and it flipped back and forth a few different times. And the jury, I guess, is still out in terms of who managed it best. But in that context, in that environment, how you communicate strategies as simple as Julie mentioned, and Sharon, like office attendance and, the most basic elements that we all took for granted as leaders, that people would show up at some point and then leave at a certain point in the day, it's really tested your ability to communicate thoughtfully, with clarity, and with success, I would argue as well. And if you don't have that ability to measure and evaluate what the impact of the decisions that you make, I think you can largely say you're flying blind, and that's a truism of every part of my leadership and the organisation certainly that Sebastian, our founder, has established. It's measure meticulously every actions that we're taking and be intentional about the decisions that we're making. It really feeds into that scientific method that I was schooled in early, and Aman clearly leads as well.
I'll jump in there with flying blind. That's my cue. I think back to, I think it was March 11th, and it was just the beginning of the stuff. It was before they'd canceled last year's March Madness, and a lot of the stuff was happening. We were skiing, and it was like, oh, we should be taking the stuff seriously. I'm lucky enough to have a wife who's also a physician on the front lines of this, so she was pretty, she took it seriously from the moment she should have. And she said, you should shut your stores down today. And I said, wait, what? Like, are you out of your mind? No way. And we discussed it, and she won, and we shut our stores down that day. And slowly over the course of the next week or two, everybody else kind of, as everyone has followed suit, but we put a sign up on the door that said, we'll reopen April 1st. And I think back then, you know what, we'll miss our March plan, but that's okay. We're going to explode in April, and we'll have big grand opening parties at all the stores, at the same day, and we'll put this rough 2 or 3 weeks behind us. But I think that's just one illustration of the amount of times I've been wrong in this entire thing, and just acknowledging that flying blind might just be the reality that we're going to be stuck with for a little while. And if that's the case, then starting to really measure ourselves on plans and actions rather than just results is probably my biggest shift in my leadership playbook, where it's always been the results are what matters at the end of it, right? What came out, not what went in. And now it's, your headlights are only showing you a month or two ahead. And so you have to kind of act within that window. We spend a lot more time building for ambiguity rather than trying to guess on the answer. And that's a huge shift for me, where I'm generally uncomfortable in this world of like, I need to know our entire, even to our board plan for this year, we drew a big circle around Q1 and said, we feel good. And then a big X around Q2, Q3, and Q4 and said, don't take this too seriously. And not having any idea what to expect has been a bizarre, feeling for any leader. But embracing that and building for ambiguity and building for agility seems to be the playbook that's emerged.
As you talk about this, Aman, it occurs to me that a lot of what I hear you saying seems to come from the entrepreneurial playbook. So that entrepreneurial spirit of live in the moment and make decisions in the moment and be willing and open to have new insights at every point that will change your strategy.
I'm curious to hear Julie's take here. I would say probably more hard lessons than anything on my end. I jokingly say, like, we took one risk, which was kind of putting everything. I left, halfway through my MBA to start this thing. We put one huge risk, which was starting the company. And my intent after that was to avoid risk as much as possible. And so in that way, like, I'm probably not your average entrepreneur. I'd rather grow, at the right pace organically through good product and not through any kind of flashy tricks or gimmicks. And with Julie, that's not to say that you would, by the way. That was more just to say that I think sometimes it's like growth at all costs, right? Let's grow this thing. Throw it all on the line, go big or go bust. And that's not us, and that's not me. And so in that way, I think I probably, our playbook probably resembles one that's far less entrepreneurial than perhaps it should. And maybe that's a big fault of mine personally. But we've definitely taken our knocks here and come out swinging despite that. I don't think we've approached it with any more entrepreneurialism than we did at the very start, which was to say, let's focus on those timeless truths. Let's focus on what we know works. Sharon, I think, really nailed it with this idea of trimming the playbook and focusing on the fewer, bigger things, which is coupled with cutting the smaller, distracting things. But beyond that, I don't think we took any kind of wild swings here that we aren't that we kind of thought up overnight.
My only comment on the topic is we launched during COVID, so we didn't have a baseline to compare to. And so it's been kind of bizarre in that way, in that, of course, we had sort of a general plan we thought we were going to hit when we started the business, but it was a huge range because we were starting from scratch. And so, I would say on one hand, it's not like we had to worry about negative comps and everything else that everyone else had to worry about. And, it's all upside for us. And on the other hand, what we don't know is what it would have been had, the pandemic not hit. And so I think we did feel like it bought us, as a startup, it bought us some time to work out the kinks of our business before it kind of, scaled in the way that we projected to scale. And for that, it's been really great. We've really focused on product market fit and getting the product right and the customer experience.
I'm curious from Sharon, from your perspective, as an established specialty retailer who lived life by comps and likes and quarterly plans, how did the kind of changes that Julie just described, how did that impact you? How did last year impact you and your business, and what kind of different ways of thinking did you need to bring to the team to get through it?
Yeah, I will tell you, the year that was 2020 was like 4 different years in 1 year. You had Q1, which was sort of kind of normal, sort of. And you got into March and things got a little crazy. April, our second quarter, starting with April for us, because we're on a calendar year. April, May, June was like, talk about, what a line looks like on a graph in terms of kind of negative performance, because it just plummeted. And then, you reopen and you start to see this climb kind of go back. And so it was, I go back to, it's, agility. I think, you throw out all of the typical rules, and I've only worked for typical established public companies. So it was hard to be much more entrepreneurial. And I would say that's the blessing in all of this. It made me become more entrepreneurial. And so there are things that we did that we would have taken months, maybe even years to do, that we did in days and weeks. Curbside pickup, improved BOPUS. We launched Instacart in record time. Just our whole omni-channel, integrated commerce, one commerce, whatever you want to call it these days. We really accelerated that in a place that I don't know that if business had been normal, we would be where we are today had it not happened. And so from that perspective, it's actually been very good for us. And we're continuing to see those trends on the direct, in particular, in other channels, continue into 2021. So it certainly was a very, very difficult year, but it was for me personally, it was incredibly educational. And I'm just super grateful that I had a team that, that I was able to go on this journey. We did it together.
So let's talk a little bit about that. It was a major theme of conversations in the last 8 episodes here at the COVID Chronicles has been about channel strategy. Mm-hmm. And we have an interesting group of CEOs and leaders here with different channel strategies that you went into the year with. And I imagine different channel strategies that you have coming out of the year.
I'll start because I've worked in many multi-channel retailers. I was at Nordstrom and Sephora and Urban Outfitters. And then I've been in some online only businesses, but I've thought a lot about, the sort of transition from store online and sort of watching that slow growth over the last 20 years. And it's been very, very steady. And, my sort of projection was always, we're going to land somewhere around 50-50 because the idea of going into store is never going away. Consumers love to shop. It's my favorite pastime personally. And I think that while the traffic has been consistently down and the need to go to a store to buy something is no longer there unless it's requires some in-person experience. When you do go, the impact is greater. So, I would say that we're getting to that place where things will probably net out like in more of an even space much faster. So the stats have been about 5 years we've sort of done in 1 year in terms of the shift to buying online. And so, I think there's a corrective moment for all of the retailers who have stores that, while it's very painful, it's sort of requiring them to rip the Band-Aid off faster. I do think, to Sharon's point, the rise of sort of curbside pickup and using Instacart for delivery, which a number of retailers have done, would never have happened this quickly had it not, been such a requirement. And so to some degree, I think this whole process has just moved everything forward faster. And it will allow retailers to kind of right-size their businesses faster than they may have done had it been a slower progress, because this was definitely the trend that was happening anyway. I don't believe physical stores are going away. I do believe the economics of them are going to change dramatically. And when we get to the other side of this, there will be more return to stores, but there will also be a permanent shift that will have taken place. And so I think it's good. It's good to force sort of the health of these businesses, because Lord knows we don't want retail to go away. If it goes away, it's bad for consumers. It's less choice. It's less fun. There's lots of downsides to it, but there's certainly going to be companies that have gone as a result, and hopefully those that are still here will be stronger. I also believe that there will be a need for additional ways for specialty retailers in particular to expand online and get new audiences.
One of the truisms in my career has always been never let a crisis go to waste. And the Sharon and Julie's point around moving faster with greater agility, doing things faster, and that they couldn't have done beforehand, given the pre-existing processes, the roadmap deliverables that you were held accountable to, the resource constraints, the comp numbers that you needed to deliver. I think it just goes to show, when you throw that traditional playbook out the window, yes, we're all accountable to our shareholders and traditional ways of delivering the results of our business. But it's just shown me and many other leaders within the business that these things are, and when I say things, I mean technology adaptations, are possible. When you do recognize that they're a necessity, as opposed to should we do this thing that we know continues to deliver a great return for us, and we can bank on and deliver that result to our shareholders, or should we test this thing that we know is implicitly true because of the way our customers are shopping today, because of the devices that they're looking to connect with us on, because of a range of different ways in which maybe the unit economics are a little bit different for our business. But that is like the lesson for me, that we can all do this. Retail has often been pointed at as an industry that isn't as dynamic or isn't as agile as traditional technology companies that have emerged through the 2000s. But I think this has shown us that as an industry, we can be as dynamic and as adaptable as what we need to be.
I'm curious to know, there was an interesting conversation in episode 5 with some of our stores experts, our retail and real estate experts, around the role of the store and the purpose of a physical store and how that might be evolving and changing. And they talked about brand, service, experience, community, and where the distinctions or the differentiations might be between digital and store. And I'm curious to know if any of you had any new insights this year about those differentiated roles.
I can say, I think for us, they're complementary. I think if anything, retail will continue to thrive in my view. Boring retail will not. And I think the community and the experience, again, I'm going to go back to the customer. What's important to your customer? And do you know your customer? Do you know what's important to them? And for those customers that you don't have and you want to go get new customers, what are they looking for? And how do you provide an experience, products, et cetera, to meet the needs of the customer? But it does all go back to the customer. And the reality is the customer has moved on, and it has forced traditional retailers to wake up and to move faster on the digital front, on the true digital front. And those that have, I think, will continue to, grow, prosper. But the experience still matters. And so knowing your customer, knowing what's important to them, and making sure that that experience is there. And for us, it is about community. It is about expertise and being able to provide information and demystifying the health and wellness space, because it's a very complicated category. And so from that perspective, for our business, we think that the confluence of the two are very important to the future of the business, and for other retailers as well.
So right, Sharon. A customer category that often is pointed to as the reason why traditional retail is dying, the Gen Zs and millennials. We conducted some research over the holiday period that demonstrated over 64% of that customer segment was doing a lot of their holiday shopping during the in the in-store environment. And when you couple that with the technology innovations and the increased flexibility and optionality that those customers are looking for, we tend to see dramatic improvements in results. So we've got an in-store network of over 60,000 locations, partnering with the likes of Foot Locker, Sephora, H&M and others, where we get a cross-section of how consumers are shopping. And we've seen across Sephora, they saw massive improvements in their ticket, massive improvements in-store conversion rates amongst that customer segment. And so, that point that you made around when you combine what the consumer's looking for with the technology that they're craving, with the devices that they're walking around in their pockets with, then results will flow. It's when
speed, I think
absolutely.
Speed, because Amazon has set the bar for speed. That's why I think you're seeing things like Instacart happen, because you can get something faster through Instacart. It's 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so, speed is also, so important as well.
Even prior to the pandemic, people would ask kind of what's the future of retail, all these store closure numbers, even in 2019, that were kind of staggering. And our answer then, and certainly now, is exactly what Sharon just said, which I'd say is transactional retail. The graveyard of online businesses that have shut down at the same time is probably twice as deep as the retail one. We just don't see it, right? We don't see the leftover bones of an online business. It just disappears quietly overnight and no one mentions it again. But to that point of kind of avoiding the trap of that boring online business or boring retail business, it serves no other purpose other than the transaction itself. Yeah. That's got to go to Amazon, right? We as consumers probably already made that shift. So in that way, the focus of retail, and I think the Yes is nailing it. I think the focus of retail, or the focus of shopping in general, has to be on things like trust, education, or touch and feel, right? Is what can you not get in a certain channel that you can get in another? Human contact, curation, artificial intelligence, right? That the Yes is certainly utilizing. But these X factors that are not just I see, I like, I buy. If you're going to do that, you may as well go to Amazon and let that happen. Let's protect the sanctity of beautiful retail, whatever the opposite of boring retail is. Whether that's physical or digital is less relevant than is there a reason for it not to just exist on a transactional platform?
Yeah, well, I go back to what Haley said earlier at the beginning when we talked about specialty retailing. Well, what's the special in the specialty retailing? If it's not special, if there's not something extra there, to your point, it's like, you might as well, you're not going to be successful in today's environment.
Yeah.
I've just decided I'm going to be printing a new shirt. Maybe we'll sell it on the Yes. Retail is dead, long live retail. This year, in addition to the challenges that COVID brought us, there was a massive sea change in the way I think our customers were viewing the brands that they shopped with in terms of societal change, and demanding in ways that I had not seen before that brands and businesses speak up, act, be transparent about actions. So you've each touched on the kind of words that I haven't heard in business conversations very often in the past, like trust and humanity and values and mission and purpose. How did you and your businesses respond to this change in our consumer behavior?
Our decision was always to kind of stay out of it, because you have a large audience and you don't want to take sides and you don't want to offend any customer. And, it was just kind of the safest way to approach things. And it suddenly flipped this year. And to be quiet was to basically make a statement. And so, I think this year was, one of the most exciting and empowering things was it really did feel like there was a sea change in terms of, I would say culture, and then also the consumer in terms of the things that matter to them and the expectation that you as a business were also showing your support for those. And so, I think no longer does it feel even sort of like the right move to stay quiet. I think you have to show your position, and you have to do it in a way that, is comfortable, and you can back up, and you can explain to your customers if they're going to complain, and you can be comfortable with it. I think the one other thing that we saw that was interesting for me to watch, because I've been watching the sort of movement for the last probably 15 years, is sustainability and the role of that as it relates to consumer purchasing. So in 2007, when I was first at Sephora, we started to build kind of a green skincare business. And while there was a real interest in the industry, there was just not a huge interest from a consumer shopping standpoint. They cared about other things more than they cared about that. And similarly, in kind of, I would say, the fashion space, I saw that, whereas we saw a really big interest in sustainability from a sort of purchasing clothing standpoint this year. And I feel like there's also been a bit of a sea change there in terms of that being a part of the driver in purchasing in a way that it didn't feel like it was as central in the past. I'm curious what others have found.
Julia, I'll jump in there because I couldn't agree more with this kind of, I'll extend it even further and say, like, brands kind of had to grow a personality, right? They had to take a stance, and they had to let people know who they were and what they stood for. And again, silence was either not an option or it was a statement in itself. We'd been building all year, I think, for this, and really for the last 8 years, on this kind of idea, again, of science being our backbone. And it turned out this year that became a stance. We took out a full page ad in the New York Times a few weeks ago. And the headline we wrote was, "We trust science." And it was not meant to be, polarizing, but we recognized that we might get some backlash. It also happened to be on the main section on the Sunday that the election was announced. So our timing was
by design.
Perfect.
We'll say a happy accident that that landed on the day that, it couldn't have, the election, if you guys remember, was announced on Saturday, so the Sunday was the big one. So so in that way, we got a little bit lucky that it was a good circulation of that paper. But it was I was up all night, terrified of what the backlash might be of us taking, for the first time in our 8 years, what sounded like a really strong stance. And it felt like this was the year to say, we talk a lot about every brand has a head, heart, and soul, or if it doesn't, then it should. Mm-hmm. And your head being kind of the rational product value prop, the heart being how you speak of it and the personality that you come, and the soul is the deeper purpose intent of it. And I think for years we've been almost shy to say, here's what we stand for. We love having really harsh, difficult conversations about sustainability, because that's where progress is born. We love having really difficult conversations about where society has natural concerns over what science can offer, whether it be in vaccines or clothing. This is our, we're engineers, and we should embrace that conversation, not shy away from it. So I think this was the year where irreversibly people stood up and said, here's who I am, like me or not. And I think that's something that we're grateful to. Sharon, you alluded earlier to the silver linings of 2020. I think that's by far our favorite, is that we let the world know who we were, and we didn't back down from that challenge. And I think it sounds like others on the call feel the same way.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with both of you. I think the other thing that it was a defining moment for our associates, because we have a very diverse team that I'm extremely proud of. Could we be doing more? There's no question. But I think the ability to kind of come out of the shadows and really, drive a different level and be part of the movement, I think is really important. And I think I think great brands and great businesses did just that.
Well, as students of retail and students of business, as each of you are, I'm curious to know, as you think back over the last year, we hear a lot about the winners being Amazon and the winners being these big broadline retailers. Who are the other winners out there that you were paying attention to, people that you thought really got it right, that you're excited to watch and excited to see continue into 2021? Who are you watching?
I'll jump in here. I think the beauty vertical was one that, in advance of this period, you may have thought, what's one thing that people will rationalize out of their spend, given that we're not putting on makeup, not as concerned about our appearance, but it solidified its position in the needs of that consumer base more than ever, because it was a reward. It was something that you wanted. It was something that was essential to your everyday life. And so Klarna saw the beauty sales soar across all demographics when we compared the pre to post sales. And that was like reflected across, as I mentioned, across all demographics. This notion of self-care emerged, this notion of not feeling like you need to apologize for it in very difficult circumstances that we saw throughout 2020. And so, that coupled with what the whole panel has discussed throughout this particular talk has been technology as an enabler of that change. Retailers like Sephora, as I mentioned, doing tremendously well during this period as a function of embracing the needs of their customer base, listening to what they're looking for and responding dynamically. It's been, I think that's another category that will continue to go from strength to strength. And then this notion of clean beauty, the likes of Beauty Counter and others that are doing tremendously well, emerging and riffing off of traditional retail models as well, I think are poised for significant success. So I'm looking forward to seeing that continue.
I think that's a great example. Another one that I think has been somebody that's, I think, done a great job is Corey Berry at Best Buy. I think when you look at kind of, if you think about kind of what that model was and kind of the journey that Best Buy has been on, I think the Best Buy team has done an exceptional job adapting. When you look at when all of the stores were closed and they weren't deemed essential, how they flipped their model so quickly to take advantage of, the stimulus checks that were coming through and what was happening with appliances and, some of the computers and the things that people were going to need to live at home during this time. I think that's an example of a retail that was traditionally very brick and mortar for a long period of time, but has really flipped their model substantively, and it's made a difference.
I think the trend that's been happening in moving and sort of the relocation of people out of cities has been fascinating. I'm on the board of Redfin, which is a real estate company and a brokerage, and the business has been just completely on fire. And they have, I think, are witnessing this migration that is very real and super interesting. And, I think similar to the home goods spaces and the electronic spaces, I think there are going to be shifts that then have impact on both the way we work and also kind of the, retail landscape, because we're seeing people moving to different locations. I think it's been one of the most interesting trends and definitely will be fascinating to kind of see what happens after the pandemic is over.
One of the things that we've seen in our customers, and it depends on stage of life and affinities and all these things, but is an explosion in our friends who run nonprofits have had, in a lot of cases, banner years, right? People got really nice, really empathetic, really fast. And that's been really interesting to watch. And hopefully a lot of those folks set up kind of recurring payments so that carries in, well past the end of this, but getting to watch a few friends who are running very, very, effective, impactful nonprofits, some political, but others that are just, focused on human wellness and overall kind of solving a lot of the world's problems, right? We had on top of everything, we had a racial divide kind of blossom in a way that we all, knew it needed to. Conversations around politics, everything that happened all in 1 year, and all these nonprofits who were saying, we're ready for this, we can handle it, let us speak for you, really exploded this year. And I hope that continues on as a trend in future years, is to say supporting nonprofits in the same way you support your favorite brands is a trend we'd like to see continue. And we will do the same, right? It's our responsibility to fund their missions or adjacent missions of our own and give back has gone from a kind of a nice to have to an obligation for any brand that a lot of our customers will support, and surely any of us on this call would agree is kind of becomes a requirement of the soul of the brands you support, that you see that they align to what you do and that they support either the nonprofits or the missions of the nonprofits that you do, right? And that kind of deeper mission-based shopping is a trend we'd like to see continue in years to come.
On a very different note, although I totally agree with that, and I think it's very exciting. Some of the trends that I have observed is that at this point, I think as you look at new businesses, there are very few opportunities to just purely replicate what exists out there, especially in retail. And so I think the sort of concept of really technology-powered retailers and retail concepts is probably what we're going to see more of. I think two of the specific trends within that include AI, which is the foundation of our business, and the ability to really take sort of this concept of building algorithms and understanding what the consumer wants and applying it to your business. And I also think sort of the social connection between shoppers is something we're going to see more and more of. So certainly the rise in use of Instagram this year, when everybody has more time and is, looking for ways to connect with the outside world, has spurred, I would say, more commerce and more activity. And I anticipate that there will be more businesses and retailers either leveraging or building off of a base that connects people to each other, and really uses technology in novel ways to sort of drive customer experiences.
I'm going to be very curious to watch what happens when things actually start opening up again and people feel like they can go places and do things. I'm going to, just fascinated, when you've got a situation where people have been somewhat, they've been cooped up at home and they've only been able to allowed to do kind of like what's in front of them. What happens when people can go out and eat again and not feel uncomfortable doing so? Or what happens I think people miss sports, miss concerts. Personally, I miss the theater in New York. Having Broadway dark is just extremely sad to me. But so it'll be very interesting to see how retail and restaurants and how all of that bounces back as it connects to community, entertainment, and doing things outside. I think that's going to be fascinating. And how do retailers position themselves as things start to open up? I was on a plane with recently, and I was sitting next to a pilot. And what does going on vacation look like, and what does that mean for retailers, and how can retailers take advantage of those types of those kinds of experience? So I'm very curious to see, and we'll watch that very closely, because I do think it will impact consumers and obviously how they spend their dollars, and then how it impacts retailing as a whole.
I think that's a really interesting point that you raised, Sharon, is we've largely, for this segment of the population that is largely more fortunate than ever than they have been, because they haven't had the trips that they go on, because they've been able to operate in their homes, because rather than eating out, you're spending half as much on getting meals and the like. You've accumulated significantly more wealth during this period, and we've seen it in terms of the credit. People are paying down their credit cards significantly more during this period. But we've never had a period now where all of a sudden people will be able to go to those concerts. So when the Red Hot Chili Peppers, the Rage Against the Machine, the Phil Collins, all these people will announce, okay, we're ready, we're going to go. And at the same time, you've got those vacations and those ski trips that Aman wants to go on, and the places that the Yes is going to be able to tell me about what outfits I want to wear on that next vacation. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a very, very exciting period of investment and spend by these customers that have been held back artificially and constrained. And so, as a company that enables purchases and enables people to purchase things that they love and that they want and that they've been held back from, we're really excited to see how that plays out for different brands and different companies, both in an in-store environment, online. We talk a lot to the team at Ticketmaster about what that process is going to look like.
I can only imagine Ticketmaster, StubHub.
Absolutely, and so, we've never had a moment where, the market has all been constrained for them. And so what does that look like when your 50 favorite bands and your 20 shows like Sharon, I've been constrained from going and being uplifted by Broadway and others. What happens then? And so I think as a company that enables purchases and enables people to get the stuff that they love and want, we're really excited to see how that all plays out, leveraging the different solutions that we provide to consumers at that time.
And I'm very...
It feels to me like it's safe to say there is definitely pent-up demand.
I'm curious if there are some things that you believe have fundamentally changed, that as we do get ready for what's next, what are the things that you think we need to keep in mind and consider, that the fundamental changes that will just not go back, things that won't go back in the box?
I'll jump in here because it's fundamental to our brand. I just think the dress code has changed. I think it's gone from highly, prescriptive, what, business casual might mean, to highly descriptive in words like sharp. It's okay if you wear a t-shirt and jeans, but just make it sharp and look good, right? We'd rather that than kind of a dumpy suit. I think people's tolerance for being really uncomfortable in general is just gone, right? I think the idea of a super constricting belt and, heels or leather shoes that are, don't break. The idea of wearing kind of super stiff fabrics, or again, in our case, we've preached against it, but going to the dry cleaner every week, right? I think this idea of kind of a high maintenance, super stiff wardrobe that is best measured by how quickly you take it off when you get home, I think is just, I don't think people are going to go back and have any interest in wearing what they wore pre-pandemic. And that tolerance is just, I think, out the window. So it's certainly, I think, wishful thinking on our behalf that trend happens, and that's what we've been building for. But we ourselves, say only put on in the morning what you want to, never dress reluctantly. And I think, and we hope the world will follow along, and we think it will.
Masks. I think
I am.
Continue to wear masks.
You think we'll continue to wear masks?
Yeah, I think so. And especially, like, think about that colleague that used to trudge into the office with the sniffles and the sneezing and everything else. That person's going to wear masks again. So it's just
I think the whole health trend and just, I think people's appreciation of health will and what that fundamentally means. I mean, so many people have been impacted by COVID-19, and while there have been many that have gotten better, tragically we've lost many others. And so I do think people will take their health a lot more seriously than they have in the past. And I think that's a good thing, whether it's what they eat, the exercise that they get, just getting outdoors, whatever that is, I think that's forever changed. I also think that work and the way we work has forever changed. While I think there are many that want to get, like Julie even mentioned, wanting to get back to the office. There are others that are just as happy, just back to the comfort that Aman said, and getting out of bed and having something sharp, but sitting in front of a screen is great too. So I think as leaders, our ability to think through how work will be different and what's acceptable, seeing somebody's kids in the background, that's okay now, hearing the dog bark or the doorbell ring, no big deal. So I do think, I hope we've taken stock into what's really important, and we've kind of simplified our lives maybe a little bit, and certainly we'll take that forward as we look ahead.
Just to provide a different perspective, I think we're all going to want to burn our sweats.
Not me, Julie.
No.
Well, thankfully, Aman makes some wonderful alternatives to sweats that are just as comfortable. So we'll all be
not to,
Ministry of
I think Aman's business is safe. I think his what he's building is definitely the future. I think comfortable fabrics and clothing matters, but I also think there's going to be a little bit of a heyday for dressing up, because I think those of us who like to do it really miss it.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's just, I think that's really well said, Julie. I wish I had that on tape and we can make that into an ad, but I think that's exactly right. It's no longer comfort or sharp. It's finding the intersection of the two, because you're right. Nobody wants to feel dumpy. People want to look nice, but they also really hate the concept of going back to a world where we're wearing stuff reluctantly. But I think you said it well.
Well, the good news is we do have it on tape, and so you can create an ad for that.
That's right.
We'll slip that out. So I want to just thank all of you for being with us. I have one final question for you. What are the insights, the lessons that you learned in the last 10 months, 12 months that you are taking with you into 2021?
I'm happy to jump in with an easy softball starter, and I'll buy time for the rest of the crew to say something more insightful. But one of the things I've started to kind of put on my own leadership playbook and encourage the other leaders on the team is to take it easy on yourself a little bit here. I think that we are all kind of type A go-getter leaders who judge ourselves constantly and hold ourselves accountable. And the old Jim Collins, when things go wrong, look in the mirror. When things go right, look out the window kind of mentality. And we kind of blame ourselves where there are gaps in our business that are a direct result of the pandemic. And I think just remembering that no one asked for this, no one wanted this, no one, we can all, it's not a stance to suggest that we'd rather this never have happened. We'd rather it be gone instantly. We didn't, bring it on to us, but we can be judged by our reaction to it, but also with a grain of salt, and that it's a wild, once in a lifetime, hopefully, experience that we're all going through together. And to give yourself a break every now and then is probably a pretty healthy move at a time like this.
Great advice. Thank you, Aman.
For me, it's the importance of a great company culture and what a great culture can deliver as it relates to how people work, what they do, and the results that you're able to deliver. And I agree with Aman around, things like, one of the things that we've talked a lot about in the executive team is boundaries. There haven't been many in 2020. And I think, there is something to be said about what it's like to get in a car and drive to work or drive home. It kind of is a bookends the day for most people anyway. And I do think that the ability to kind of put some boundaries up so that people can have another part of their life, I think is important. As a leader, though, I think also the value of listening, the importance of perspective, the importance of transparency and communication is, I think, all great lessons from this year in terms of how it can apply as we look ahead to the future.
Thank you, Sharon.
I agree wholeheartedly with both of those comments. I would say, to add to it, I think probably the discipline around sort of documentation, the structure of the things we're working on, and the way that we have come to communicate goals and track kind of monthly performance are things that probably became sharper through needing to communicate digitally and virtually. And I think those things will actually benefit us going into the future. I think for me personally, and I think many people I know, the value of human contact and the energy that you get from it is hard to replace with Zoom. And so I think that we will really look forward to being able to bring that back. But I think, to Sharon's point, we probably won't go back full time, in the same way that we did in the past. And so some of the new tools that we've developed will actually become really useful. Just the sort of everyone being so comfortable with Zoom, many of us have teams that are somewhat, they're remote and in different places. And so I think the ability to sort of keep all of those things going well will actually be strengthened, having to have worked in this fully remote way for a year. So I think that's a little bit of a silver lining.
Yeah,
Great.
and just from my perspective, I think it's challenging moments like these are a remarkable time to lead and to help others. And from my perspective, taking some of that wisdom, be it speaking kindly to yourself or others during these difficult times, ensuring that remains at the forefront.
Right. Well, thank you to all of you. Thank you, Rafe and Julie, Sharon and Aman, for joining us for the CEO Roundtable to close out our COVID Chronicles series. I know that our audience of retailers and those who love retail will get a lot out of the insights and the perspectives and the ideas that you shared with us today. And you're one part of helping us be better and advance this industry.
As we wrap this series, the specialty retail sector faces unprecedented challenges. COVID cases and deaths stand at record highs, the country remains divided, and retail sales and employment, unfortunately, are dropping still. The retailer Christopher & Banks just filed for bankruptcy and is closing all its 449 stores. Who's next? Fortunately, there are many rays of hope. Along with a more infectious variant, vaccinations too are spreading. We have new leadership in Washington with a determined resolve to kick this thing, just like the resilient retail leaders we've heard from in this series. Specialty retail is emerging leaner, more digital, more responsive, and more committed to social justice than ever previously imagined. Stores will be more experiential, more localized and community-driven, and offer less friction for customers. The next-gen e-commerce sites, fueled by AI and video, will make online shopping more relevant and, frankly, just more fun. And most important, our customers will be giddy and celebratory with the return of social closeness. Let's hope. So thank you for spending time with us, and let's thank all those involved in the series. Okay, let's get back to work.